Hello, today is Monday, January 5th. Happy New Year, and welcome to episode 541 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson. I'm joined today by senior fellows Morgan Vigna, Matthew Hyman, and Jessica Jones. All right, we got a humdinger to start off the year. The U.S. military went into Venezuela this weekend. It grabbed Nicolás Maduro and his wife and brought them to New York, where they will stand trial for narco trafficking charges. Interestingly, in a city run by a fellow socialist, Zoran Mamdani. So that's going to produce some interesting politics. Of course, what we're going to talk about are the foreign policy aspects of this. The U.S. has not left troops on the ground in Venezuela. There are no U.S. troops in that country. Rather, there is a massive U.S. Navy and military presence off the coast of Venezuela. And President Trump has basically said to the remaining government there, now run by former Vice President Delcy Rodríguez, behave well, or I may have to come in and do this again, and it'll be even bigger next time. And the results may not be as positive for you, kind of implying that he would kill Delcy Rodríguez, in my view. Okay. Vigna, I want to go to you first here. What's your reaction to this amazing turn of events, which, by the way, I don't think was a huge surprise because we knew something was going to happen. It happened very quickly. And I think some of the follow-on aspects of this are what we're going to be focused on. So what's your take?
Yeah, Les, so my first take is that Zoran Mamdani lives rent-free in your head. Second is that this operation that we've seen in Venezuela that occurred over the weekend has actually been in the works for a while here. We've had CIA officers in Venezuela for a very long time. I would say longer than the reported August time frame. But Delta Force had been training for this for months, right? And they were really sort of waiting for the ideal conditions to go in, mainly weather, right? And so when they had the opportunity, President Trump gave the order, and we saw this really incredible operation take place. Putting aside sort of the legalese and whether or not violating a sovereign nation's territorial integrity is the right approach. Putting that aside, because I think we can have a longer debate on that. What we've seen in Venezuela specifically, I would not argue that it is regime change. I know Matt's probably going to have a take later on what we should call it. We are seeing, Delcy Rodríguez, the vice president, come in as acting or interim president. And this is a case in which, the Trump administration is working with the devil we know. The socialist regime in Venezuela right now, it has the authority over the military, the security services, law enforcement, et cetera. And so, and they have that loyalty of this core base in a way in which the opposition, led by Machado, who was believed to be democratically elected in the last presidential election, unfortunately does not, right? And so in this case, the Trump administration is not looking to necessarily change the regime immediately. I think at some point, medium, long term, they may be looking towards a democratic transition. But for right now, I think the priority is stabilizing the country itself. And then, frankly, looking to see how we can gain economically for the United States. Again, President Trump is the America First president. He sees Venezuela as a neighbor with deep resources. Largest oil reserves. You've got the largest gold reserves. It is an incredibly economically resource-rich country, and so I think President Trump wants to see how we can exploit that. For America's gain. With that said, though, I think there are a number of other sort of concerns that we have. Obviously, the drug cartels and narco trafficking being another. So I don't necessarily think that this is going to be an instance in which we'll be wrapped up and we'll have a bow on it anytime soon. It's going to be, I think, a longer term approach. But I do think it's an interesting take. as we saw with the Bush administration, particularly with Iraq and Afghanistan, there was fundamental regime change there. This is a different approach, which I think will need to stand, which will really be a testing ground.
Jones, what are your thoughts here? President Trump said the U.S. would run Venezuela. How are we going to run Venezuela when we have, at least no one we're publicly acknowledging in that country?
I like to point out I was in Chile, off the grid for a bit, and the first alerts when I got internet and Wi-Fi back were Venezuela alerts. So it was a quick change for me and for everyone. But I think that's the ultimate question. To Morgan's point, right now we don't see regime change, right? We see the Trump administration's approach, which is a want of limited military operation, specific goals, taking out one individual, showing that the U.S. has the optionality, the capabilities to do what it needs to do when it wants to. And then as much as we talked here on the show about we're not too surprised that something happened, it was quick. Obviously there was no congressional notification. It doesn't look like the Trump administration cares as much as about consensus building before it takes action, which kind of puts a lot of other, I think, nation state leaders probably on alert. And so that question, though, of how you've got President Trump saying we're going to run the country, you've got Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's really, he was taking the press circuit and has been in the spotlight, saying we're not running day-to-day operations. And to your point, Les, when you talked in the intro, there's still a huge U.S. military presence weighing, on the outside of the country saying, stay in line or something else might happen to you. And so what happens when right now you have an interim president says that they're going to cooperate with the U.S., but you might have other government officials in the country saying that might not happen. What if there is a breakdown? What does the U.S. have to do? Does regime change start to percolate up a little bit more in a way that the Trump administration does not want to see, right? It does not want to be an administration of forever wars. And like I said, I think, and to Morgan's point about resource control, I think, the U.S.'s actions are much about resources. It is about trying to push out China and Russia, right? Like, hey, these countries, nation leaders, if you're not going to do it yourself, we're going to do it for you, right? And I think that's the message that we're seeing when it comes to Greenland, which is, again, in our headlines in the spotlight, is that if you can't take care of these problems in the U.S., for U.S. national security interests, we're going to do it. And so I think the upcoming weeks are going to tell who is actually running the country and how much the U.S. is going to have to engage.
Yeah, Les, just to jump in here, to Jess's point, I think one of the best viral interviews that have been going on that I've seen in Venezuela was by a protester who was not protester, but he was like celebrating, Maduro's decline. And he was very frank. He was just like, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he was like, what do you think, China and Russia wanted in Venezuela? Our recipe for our
empanadas.
It's very clear in terms of like, yeah, Russia and China are here as well. Like, duh. It was just very, very, I thought, a very witty, but also very apt approach to sort of the situation in which Venezuela is in geopolitically.
Matthew Hyman, President Trump had promised that something was going to happen in Venezuela. Notably, last year, he promised he would do something about Iran. He then bombed the Iranian nuclear weapons program. He either obliterated it or decimated it or some other terrific verb, but it seemed to have an impact. Let's put it that way. Now he's acted in Venezuela. Has deterrence been restored? And how will this change other national leaders' behavior, in your view?
I think it's too early to say it's been restored, but these are certainly the steps you would take to restore deterrence and to send a message. And as a strategic matter, anytime you can take off an ally of our enemies, that's a good thing. So obviously Venezuela was an ally of Iran and Cuba and Russia and China. These are not nation states that are friendly to the U.S. And to the extent that you could undermine one of their friends in Latin America, I think that's a good thing for the U.S. And so this is a step towards restoring that deterrence. I also just want to, I know we are sometimes quick to bypass what's happened yesterday for what needs to happen tomorrow or down the road, but the success of this intelligence and military operation is simply, to my mind, remarkable. And that's not to say I didn't think it could be done. It's just remarkable when you actually see it executed. to be able to go to a country, remove the leader. And I think this is at this point leadership change, not regime change, as sort of Morgan and Jessica alluded to be able to remove a leader from one of its most secure installations and to come away with him and his spouse and to only have 6, based on current report, U.S. military members injured, no deaths. It's really a remarkable thing. And I don't know many other countries that could pull something like this off as successfully as the U.S. has done. I agree with Jessica and Morgan's points about what are the next steps, though, because yes, Delcy Rodríguez is the interim president, but reporting indicates that the real power sort of behind that throne is the defense minister, Pedrino, and the interior minister, Cabello, and what they do and what their underlings decide to do in response, I think will be really interesting. And it feels like the Trump administration has taken the approach of, we're going to remove Maduro. Now let's see if you all fall in line. And it's almost like a salami tactic. And then if you don't fall in line, maybe we'll do something else and something else. It seems like the administration would like to see a much more organic change in that country than one where, as in the Iraq example, we send thousands and thousands of personnel, military and civilian, to try and reform a country. I think they'd much rather it reform itself in some way, or at least, at a minimum, operate in a manner that's conducive to U.S. interests, even if there's not total reform. So I think that's why we see a gap between some of the rhetoric from the president and some of the rhetoric from Secretary Rubio. I think they're sort of feeling it out and going slowly.
Yeah. So my kind of, by the way, there's a ton of issues here, and we're just kind of skating along the surface. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this for the next couple of weeks at least, and then a whole bunch of knock-on issues in the months ahead. But for me, it's the comparison, exactly as you were saying, Matthew, with Iraq and Afghanistan. Is this a better approach? If in Iraq, what if we had left Uday and Qusay Hussein in charge? How would things have turned out if we just left the country at the time? Hopefully, it doesn't turn out like that would have turned out, and that the Venezuelans will get their act together and come up with an approach here that is good for their country, is good for the Venezuelan people, and is good for the relationship. Delcy Rodríguez has already said something to the effect of, we're willing to work with the Trump administration collaboratively going forward. We'll see if she's able to actually implement that, or if there's going to have to be other action here. But it is a real opportunity here for President Trump to show that his approach is actually better than what the U.S. has been doing this century, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan, where in Afghanistan, the Taliban's back in charge. That arguably didn't work at all. We did have some positive outcomes. Osama bin Laden is dead. So are a lot of the bad guys. In Iraq, we've got a kind of flawed democracy. So I'd call it maybe half a win. In Iraq, we'll see if that could get better over time. But it's not a great track record for the invade, occupy, and spend massive amounts of money approach. Could the just take out the leader approach be a more efficient way of doing it? If nothing else, we're going to save a lot of money here, it looks like. Okay, that's a wrap. Thanks always to Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Wednesday, January 7th, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube. Check out our channel for a video of today's episode. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.